Okay, guys, we are live on Marlins 9, live streaming this episode today. I'm Jeremiah Geiger, as always, and today I'm joined on the podcast with Ryan Schlesinger at Marlins. Ryan, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for letting me on. Excited to preview the Tigers series, which is starting right now. I know it's 0-0. Last time I checked, Berger hit a fly ball to the warning track, but confidence is pretty low right now. I have them winning one against the Tigers, who are 20-20, and Sixto's in a bases loaded jam right now. But yeah,
Yeah, no, coming off a series against the Phillies, you lose 2 out of 3, and quick little road trip up to Detroit. For those of you on YouTube, you can see the score ticker at the bottom. This is the first series the Marlins have played in Detroit since 2019. So a team that now with the interleague play, you're going to see every year, but obviously going up to Detroit, first time in a while. I didn't know this, but Miami holds a 12-5 all-time record against the Tigers. So little footnote there. But you said it, the confidence is low. Confidence is low. 11-31, 20 games under 500, Ryan. What do you make of the start?
yeah. What I make of it is that kind of can't get much worse than this. I just expect it to stay like this the entire season. This team has given me pretty much nothing to get excited about. And even now, with Garrett and Luzardo back, the team isn't even at full strength because you just traded a rise, and Bell still isn't really performing. We knew going into the season he wasn't that consistent. He's still like a 200 hitter. This offense is still dead, and you have two good pitchers with a league worst offense. It's not going to mix well. Even though I will say the bullpen is coming together a little bit more.
So you said it right there that this team isn't giving you much to cheer about. And that's how I felt all season, especially when you take Luis Arias out of the picture, who was one of my favorite Marlins on this team. The rebuild's fully underway. However, you mentioned the return of Jesus Luzardo and Braxton Garrett, and you can kind of tell that the rotation is starting to come together. Obviously, not what any of us wanted it to look like heading into 2024 or at the end of 2023, because we would have wanted to see a rotation with Sandy and with Yori Perez, and really those two guys anchoring the rotation. But Jesus Luzardo coming off the injured list, Braxton Garrett finally making his season debut, and he looked pretty solid. Gave up the home run early on off the curveball, but striking out 8 Phillies, going 5 innings. It's a solid start from Braxton Garrett, who, dating back to last season, has been one of the more consistent Marlins starters. And then, of course, Jesus Luzardo going 5 2/3, only 2 earned runs, striking out 8 as well. And it's really positive to see from him because right now, I'm going to say it pretty bluntly, he's their biggest trade piece. Him and Jazz Chisholm Jr. are the 2 biggest trade pieces that the Marlins have. And for this rebuild to be successful, it was imperative that the Marlins get a good return for Jesus Luzardo. Probably should have traded him in the offseason. But to see his return, hopefully he stays healthy, is huge.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. To talk a little bit about Garrett, I was really impressed with what I saw for him. Yes, the line doesn't really suggest that. 5 hits, 5 earned runs, and 5 1/3. But I mean, you got to look at the strikeout to walk ratio. 8 strikeouts and only 2 walks in his first start back. And 8 strikeouts just seems very encouraging, especially against a pretty solid Phillies lineup. I know they strike out a lot. They got a lot of big bats, but still 8 Ks for a guy like Braxton Garrett, who was mostly a guy who pitched to contact last season. It's really encouraging. This is just his first start back. So we'll see how much Braxton Garrett can build his trade value. Because like you mentioned, Jesus Luzardo and Jazz are probably the biggest assets. But right in there with Jazz is probably Braxton Garrett as their second biggest trade asset. I think Garrett might even get a better haul than Jazz just because of how inconsistent Jazz has been. He's not really hitting well this season, even though he's finally staying healthy. I don't want to jinx anything, but he has been very healthy this entire season, and he's been a pretty much league average hitter. Good defense, good speed, but just league average hitting, and you still can't trust him to stay healthy, even though he has been for what now a month and a half stretch. But it feels like he's been healthy for a while because you barely even get a month and a half straight of IL free baseball from Jazz.
And it sucks because you mentioned him being healthy to start the season, and the one time he's been healthy for an extended period of time, the Marlins are completely out of it. They're 20 games under. So it's kind of bittersweet because you have a healthy Jazz, and as a team, collectively, you haven't been able to do anything with it. And now you're looking at something where Jazz will be out of town and will continue his career in a different city, in a different uniform. And somebody as charismatic and as entertaining as Jazz is, um, for this fan base, it's a blow because for me, Jazz is just spectacular to watch in all facets of the game. He makes the game fun. One of the faces of this franchise, although you said statistically he's been struggling a little bit, no doubt the talent is still there. All the tools are there for him to be a star in this game. He's got the personality to go with it. But, we're talking about trades. There's another guy we'll kind of break down in terms of trade value. We talked about Jesus Luzardo earlier, moving into the pitching staff. Tanner Scott is somebody who I believe the Marlins need to trade now. They need to trade as soon as possible. I'm talking about this week, if possible, because right now with Tanner Scott, as Marlins fans, we see him pitch. We know how he operates. He struggles with command, and he's prone to have a bad start. Or a bad outing. He is prone to give up one of those blown saves like we saw against Atlanta. It's very, very risky to continue to hold on to him because when you look at Major League Baseball as a whole, the need for bullpen help is constant. And if you're willing to give up Luis Arias, who's your best hitter on May 4th, then you look at Tanner Scott and the consistency he's been on right now, I would try to trade him right now. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I was fine when the Marlins traded Arias. This timing, I actually liked it. But with Scott, he's already on an expiring contract. I believe he's a free agent this offseason. And yes, his ERA is good right now, but the walk rate is first percentile. And last year it was 60th percentile. And while he's had a first percentile walk rate, he still has a 2.25 ERA. So that could even go down if he starts to regain control of his walks. And just so many more teams will be shopping for a closer. Still, teams are still learning how to manage their bullpen. It's still only mid-May. So I'd prefer if they just waited till the traditional trade deadline. But yeah, we'll just have to see how it plays out. But something really impressive with Tanner Scott. He had a first percentile walk rate in 2022, as we remember, before he turned into a dominant reliever last year. And he had a 4.31 ERA this year. He also has a first percentile walk rate, the walk percentage over 20%, but he has a 2.25 ERA. So he's starting to learn how to manage to pitch with runners on base, work around the walks. But again, you'd still like to see Scott get that walk rate back to at least above the 25th percentile.
That was an excellent breakdown because what you're looking at right now is a potential closer for another team or a setup man with another team who's proven that he can pitch in big games. He did it last year. The issue has been and will always be the control. And to be walking so many guys this early on, he's really playing with fire. And it's something that obviously other teams will be noticing. So it's imperative for the Marlins and for Tanner Scott that he continues to bring that walk rate down in more high leverage outings. Hopefully this series in Detroit, the Marlins will be able to get out a couple wins and put him in an opportunity for a save, something that is very rare to come by right now. Speaking about this series and the Tigers, who is some of your players to look for? Whether that is, we'll start with the guys in Miami, the hometown team, and then we'll kind of take a look at some Tigers, if there's any Tigers that deserve a shout out for their production this season.
Yeah, well, for the Marlins, I would say Look for Vidal Brujan again. He's been pretty steady. Obviously, he started the season very slow. And at the end of April, everyone was like, when are they going to DFA him? Are they just waiting to tank his value so that by the time they DFA him, he won't get claimed on waivers and he could be in their minor league system? And then all of a sudden, right after all this DFA talk, May starts, I think it was at the very end of April, and he just starts heating up. And now he's up to a 253 batting average, 725 OPS, by far the best stretch of his major league career. He's never had, I think his sample size last year in the entire year with the Rays was just about as many at bats as it is this year. And he was hitting like 179, something well below 200 last year with the Rays. And now this year, a massive improvement. He's still only 25 or 26, I think. So I really like what I've seen from Vidal Brujan. And then Brian De La Cruz just been pretty steady, 771 OPS after that massive hot streak, especially in that Wrigley Field series against the Cubs, 262 batting average. And then Otto Lopez, who's been a regular starter now, 310 batting average, 961 OPS, quietly raking at the back of the Marlins lineup, doing exactly what he had done in that very small, like week and a half long sample size in the minors that got him the call. So I'm very impressed with Lopez, De La Cruz, and Brujan. And then for the Tigers, I picked Kerry Carpenter as my series MVP. Very underrated player. 281 batting average, 854 OPS. He has 5 home runs and 114 at-bats this season, 18 RBIs. And then someone else who I like, Riley Green, who just had an RBI for the Tigers. They're up 3-0 right now in the top of the third. 252 batting average with 9 home runs and an 866 OPS. And he's only 23 years old.
Riley Green, building block for the Tigers as they try to make a return to the playoffs. I like it. I like it, Ryan. I like the Marlins you focused on. The way I'm going to go, I'm going to take a look at Ryan Weathers. Go back to the pitching staff. Ryan Weathers has started every single available appearance he's had. He started every game that he's supposed to start this season, been able to stay healthy, and is quietly pitching himself into Marlins all-star consideration. You talk about Brian De La Cruz, and I think he is the front runner right now, really having a career season. But Ryan Weathers, a guy to keep an eye on as he makes a start. It will be the second start against the Tigers, the second game against the Tigers. Weathers will be on the mound, and I'm looking forward to seeing his stuff tomorrow night. As for the Tigers, you mentioned Kerry Carpenter, Riley Green. Those are really good ones. Unfortunately, I'm going to kind of go on the negative aspect. I want to see what Javier Baez is going to do, because we kind of have a Javi Baez situation in Avisail Garcia. Arguably, Javi Baez has been worse than Avisail Garcia by far in his stint in Detroit in the Motor City, hitting 171 with an OPS of 437. I mean, just atrocious numbers from Javier Baez. Looking at the box score right now, he did get a run and he got an RBI so far tonight. So, as I say, he's our Avisail Garcia. He's already driven in a run for the Tigers. And then Detroit's in an interesting spot in terms of competitiveness in the AL Central. You have teams like the Guardians and the Twins, both of whom I think can make a run at the playoffs. And then you have up-and-coming teams like the Kansas City Royals, who I think could be this year's version of the D-backs or the Marlins last season. So Detroit kind of stuck in mediocrity right now at 20-20, and it's going to be interesting as the month of May comes to a close and we get into June. Will Detroit be a serious contender in the American League Central? And really a strange division, top to bottom. So apart from the White Sox, I think it's kind of a lot like the National League East. There's some comparisons between the National League East and the AL Central, because you have teams who are surefire, very good teams like the Guardians, the Braves, the Mets, kind of like the Twins, the Phillies. And then you got the White Sox and the Marlins, both of whom are bottom sellers.
Yeah, I really don't know what the Tigers are going to do. But if they just hang around 500, let's say they're 2 games over at the trade deadline, I think they should be pretty aggressive. They already have a really good bullpen, and they might be just one good starting pitcher and one solid bat away from really contending for a wild card spot, maybe even the division, because the AL Central is pretty weak, even though, yes, it does draw some comparison to the NL East, mostly because the Guardians and the Twins are off to pretty hot starts. I don't think that's going to last. I don't think the Twins are an 8 games over 500 team. I don't think the Guardians are, on paper, a 9 games over 500 team. So I think it'll even out and the Tigers will get back in the race for first place. I think, in my opinion, the Royals are actually the best team in that division, even though they're a half game back, technically in third place. There's a race for first place right now between the Guardians, Twins, and Royals. But the Royals, they have a good future too. They'll probably be around 500 at the deadline, and then probably try to add a starting pitcher and another solid bat. So I don't know. We could see maybe 4 buyers in that division, other than the White Sox. Every team buying at the deadline, or at least standing pat. We will not see that much selling in the AL Central, exactly like the NL East, because I don't even think the Nationals are going to sell this season.
I don't think the Nationals are going to sell this season either. I think in 2025, you're really going to see the fruition of the rebuild for the Washington Nationals. But 2024 has been surprising. They've been competitive every step of the way. And you mentioned the Royals possibly buying and possibly getting a starting pitcher. I wonder if Miami and Kansas City would be a good fit for a trade as we approach the trade deadline. Maybe a Jesus Luzardo going to Kansas City in return for prospects. That would be interesting.
Yeah, Luzardo or Garrett, because I think Garrett will have pretty much the same availability at the deadline as Luzardo. And I mean, we have to see how good his value is at the deadline. But so far, even though he gave up 5 earned runs, 8 Ks in his first start back, I have some confidence in Braxton Garrett as well. And I think he needs to be a solid trade piece in order for the fire sale to be successful, because you need more than just Jesus Luzardo and Tanner Scott, who won't bring that back that much value because he's a reliever, in order to have a big fire sale and get a massive prospect haul back.
Is there going to be anybody that you want Miami to not trade? Give me a couple names who you want the Marlins to try to build around. Is there anybody at all?
Honestly, for players that are healthy, Jake Berger, I know he's struggling right now. He just came back from the IL and he has like 1 or 2 hits. But Berger, I think he has club control until like after the 2026 or 2027 season. So he's about to enter the prime of his career. There's no reason to trade him this year, maybe in 2 years. But yeah, you stick with him through the deadline this year. And then on the pitching side of things, nobody that's healthy. I would not like to see Sandy get traded. It wouldn't really make sense to trade him while he's recovering from Tommy John. That's just selling low. So
No,
I think the odds of trading Sandy are very low. So we don't have to worry about that. And then Yuri Perez, who I'm just going to keep that in the back of my mind, because the way the Rays operate is that all players are available at all times. I don't think Yuri will get traded this offseason, obviously not during the deadline because he's rehabbing from Tommy John. But I need to see at least 4 years of Yuri Perez, because I'm keeping my expectations real. I know they're probably not going to extend him. It's the Marlins. Let's be real here. But I'd like to see at least 3 or 4 seasons out of Yuri starting in 2025 until 2028, 2029, until Bendix decides to trade him as part of that revolving door.
See, that's when I think the next competitive window is going to be, is 2027, 2028. I don't think the Marlins are going to win next year or 2026. I think we're looking at least, including this year, at least 3 full seasons of suck, of bad baseball, bad Marlins teams. Yuri Perez is a guy I believe is untouchable. I think the Marlins are not even going to pick up the phone when it comes to trade offers for him because of how incredibly special a pitching prospect he is. Over the weekend, we saw the debut of former LSU pitcher Paul Skeens with Pittsburgh, not even a year removed from the draft. And Skeens and Yuri Perez, both of them feel like come just elite talents, um, arms of gold, if you will. These guys both, you could see competing for Cy Young awards year in and year out down the road. So I think Yori Perez is a guy that Miami is clearly going to build around. I also want them to continue to build around Max Meyer. I'm a big Max Meyer believer. Down in AAA, we remember on Marlins Twitter the outrage a lot of us had when they optioned him after the success he had against the Atlanta Braves in 2 really good starts. He's down there working on all of his pitches, and not just the slider and fastball, but continuing to hone and develop that changeup. So on the pitching side, I have Max Meyer and Yori Perez as 2 guys you continue to build around. Sandy, as much as I hate to say it, I'm worried that Sandy will be traded eventually because of the money. If you look at the money, his contract, which is a team-friendly contract, is severely backloaded, and he's due to make a ton of money in the next few years. And we know how Peter Bendix operates. They don't like having a high payroll. Bruce Sherman does not like having a high payroll. And you could see a scenario where, imagine that, Sandy Alcantara is traded, definitely not this year, but possibly next season, or next off season.
Yeah, that's a great point you make with Sandy. I kind of forgot how backloaded that contract is. But yeah, I agree with what you said about Max Meyer. And I think because they sent him to AAA, they're so focused on developing him, which now thinking back on it, because they knew probably ahead of time, Bendix was seriously thinking about trading Arise after that just awful start in early April. Like, they knew they weren't going to be competing. So now just thinking back on it, I am fine with them sending Meyer down, because you got to remember he's barely pitched in the minors before. He was drafted in 2020. He pitched in the minors in 2021. Then he was called up in 2022. And then he had Tommy John, missed, I think, the last maybe month and a half of 2022. So he's only had 1 full season pitching in the minors. I know he's a college pitcher and it's a little different, but still, he needs that experience under his belt, and maybe we see him in the majors in August and September when things are really completely meaningless, and they maybe trade away Garrett and Luzardo, and some spots in the rotation really open up. So I like them sending Meyer down to develop that changeup. I think he's working on a 2-seamer as well as a 4th pitch, because you don't really want to have 3 pitches as a starter. And they're not going to try to return him into a reliever, obviously, or else maybe they could have turned a reliever instead of sending him down to AAA. Clearly, they won't do that. But yeah, I just think sending him down to AAA shows that the Marlins are so focused on developing him and that he won't be traded, at least within the next 4 years.
That's well said, especially with the addition of the 2-seamer. 4 pitches would be huge for Max Meyer. Absolutely huge, because he already has the elite slider. We knew that. And the fastball is a good one. It will sit 94, 95. But if he can really get a good changeup and a serviceable 4th pitch, if you're talking about that 2-seamer being effective, I mean, the sky's the limit for a rotation anchored by Yori Perez and Max Meyer. A 1-2 punch of those 2, I mean, that's going places. Now we're talking possibly a continuation of a very good rotation transitioning into an elite rotation, depending on any additional prospects or trades this front office makes. It's tough right now. It's tough to be a Marlins fan. Like, there's no doubt about it. It's one of those seasons where there's not a lot to look forward to as the months progress in terms of wins and losses. We know this team is bad. They're going to lose well over 100 games. It's a bad team. But there are some positive notes as fans that we can look to, players that can be developed. And I think you understand that, which is huge for the fan base to try to see some positives in an otherwise pretty awful season. I mean, you've been a fan, Ryan. You said you've been following the team since about 2019.
Yeah.
So a question for you, after 2023, how did you feel about this team going into 2024? Is this what you expected?
No, I don't think this is what anyone expected, but my expectations were not very high after, obviously, they didn't sign anyone this offseason. They brought in a new GM or president of baseball operations in Bendix's case because he's technically both of them. But new regime, and I knew this was probably going to be a retooling year, but I just didn't expect to go things. I didn't expect things to go this way. But then when Yuri went down with Tommy John, I think that was when things really spiraled down, because I think they would still be near 500 right now, below 500 because the NL is so good, but maybe 5 games under. Definitely not this bad. If they still had Yuri, they still had Garrett. Their bullpen was good at the start of the season, because that bullpen, even though they're figuring things out right now, it was abysmal in April. And some of their hitters were better. Berger went to the IL, as we know. But I was just expecting a little bit more out of the guys who were already here. That didn't happen. So then I knew that if the guys who were already here weren't going to perform, we didn't add anyone, and guys are already injured, it's going to be a recipe for a disaster. So my expectations weren't very high, but I still expected to win over 70 games. But obviously, it seems like there's maybe a under 5% chance the Marlins even get to that 70 win mark.
Yeah, I was expecting a lot more. Perhaps that is a bit of, recency bias. If you look at 2023 and you make the postseason and how awesome that was, and you want so badly as a fan to run it back, and it didn't happen. And now, right now, it's tough. We're entering the dog days of summer, but there's nowhere to go but up. And that is what we have to remember. Right now, I'm going to check on the game here. It's 3-zip, Tigers up in top of the 4th inning. So I think right now we're going to wrap things up. It's a pretty good time to just under 30 minutes of this podcast. But if you're watching on YouTube, this is a live stream, and it will be posted on YouTube as well to watch if you didn't catch the live. And as always, we'll be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts a little later tonight. So, Ryan, again, thank you for coming on the podcast. It's great to talk baseball with you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, and let's go fish.